This is a case of State of Texas versus the Police Department of Texas, which involves the charge that the defendant violated criminal rules code 123456 and is now charged with the crime of first-degree murder. The court is now in session. Is the prosecution ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defense ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. But at first, good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I begin with some general comments on our roles in this trial. Throughout the proceedings, you will act as the judge of facts, and I will be the judge of the law. Although I may comment on the evidence as judges of the facts, you are the only judges of the evidence. However, when I tell you what the law is, my view of law must be accepted. There is a basic principle that is fundamental to your role as a juror. In this case, there is a requirement of proof on the balance of probabilities, which means the evidence that has more weight and is more probable must be accepted. You should then decide in favor of the party that has presented the best evidence. Before calling on the plaintiff counsels to give his or her opening statement, I will tell you about the law of negligence that affects the outcome of this case. A duty of care is an obligation accepted by the law, and everyone must conform a particular standard of conduct for the protection of others against unreasonable risks. What is reasonable care will be decided on the facts and the surrounding circumstances of the case. If you find on the facts that the defendant was reckless in the consequences of his actions, then he is liable for negligence. Now I will call upon the prosecution to make an opening statement.
Your Honor, the state will provide beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Mr. Smith, violated Criminal Code 123456 and by doing so is guilty of first-degree murder. The state will show the following facts in this case. On the morning of March 20, 2021, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Smith were out driving the police car on the daily patrol. At this time, they happened along the wall that divides Yellowtown from Greentown. Whereupon Mr. Jordan and Mr. Smith came upon the victim, Mr. Brown, sitting on the wall. Mr. Brown began making remarks about the police officer care. Mr. Jordan proceeded on his daily routine. When Mr. Smith stopped and inquired of Mr. Brown as to why he was making these remarks, there was an argument between the police officers and Josh, in which the police started making remarks on Josh's body. They later left him back in a bad mood, but didn't know that this man has high blood pressure, and in the madness, he got hurt, attacked, and fell off the wall, lying there helpless. By the time the officer came back, seeing him lying down the street, they did have a look but did not see the breath of Josh Brown anymore. The doctor, Mr. Jarvis, and a man named Josh Dean, a bystander who witnessed the accident, will provide the police not directly but indirectly caused the death of Josh Brown. From the evidence you will hear, you have no choice but to find the defendant guilty of the crime as charged. Thank you.
Thank you. The court will now hear the defense of opening statement.
Your Honor, the defense intends to show the following facts in this case. First of all, you all have to notice that Mr. Brown was in a precarious sitting position on the wall. Let's look at the anatomy of the victim. His rounded bottom does not lend itself to sitting stably. My client, Mr. Jordan, would testify that he was on his regular daily rounds with Mr. Smith. They came upon the wall that divides nursery land and fairy tale land. Mr. Brown was sitting on the wall and began to make menacing remarks to the police department car. Mr. Jordan did proceed on his daily routine, but Mr. Smith stayed behind to talk to Mr. Brown. He tried to explain to him that making nasty remarks about the police car is not the way that people in Texas should act. At that time, Mr. Smith would testify to you that Mr. Brown became rather upset. He began talking about his life on the wall and how nobody even bothers to check on him. Mr. Smith would tell you that he felt it best to let the matter drop, and so he continued on his rounds. Upon returning to the wall, he and Mr. Smith found Mr. Brown in a heap. They did try to help him, but Mr. Brown's breath went off. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client, Mr. Smith, is an honorable man who continues in his daily rounds of protecting our fair land. While Mr. Brown's demise is unfortunate, I am sure that the evidence that you will hear today will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Brown's fall was an accident and that Mr. Smith should be found not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. The prosecution, you may now proceed with your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would like to call as its first witness, Mr. George Dean.
Mr. Johnston, please take a stand. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Mm, yes, I do.
State your name for the court, please.
My name is George Dean.
Where do you live, Mr. Dean?
321 Watch Hood Lake.
Where were you on the morning of March 20, 2021?
I was in Washington Street on my way to bring my grandma her new fridge.
Did you see anything unusual happen that day?
I certainly did.
Tell the court what you saw.
As I was walking to take my grandma's fridge back in the back of my car, I saw a man in the police uniform talking to the person I later on discovered, Mr. Brown.
You see that man in the courtroom today?
Yes, that's him.
Let the record reflect that the witness identified the defendant. Now proceed, Mr. Dean. What do you see then?
Well, this man was talking to Mr. Brown, and then the conversation got really loud.
Could you hear what was being said?
The man was teasing Mr. Brown about his rounded bottom. Who is this guy to talk about someone else? Has he looked in the mirror lately?
Objection. The witness is offering an opinion, and I request that that statement be stricken from the record.
Objection sustained. Please confine your testimony to the facts.
Yes, Your Honor.
We'll continue, Mr. Dean. What else did you see?
As I was saying, this guy was really giving Mr. Brown a bad time. Mr. Brown began to get really upset and started to rock. That man kept shouting at him until he finally fell off the wall.
What happened then?
The guy just went back to his car and drove away. He left Mr. Brown lying there, sort of helpless.
What happened next?
Well, in just a few minutes, the guy came back along with another guy.
What did they do?
The other guy got down and tried to wake Mr. Brown up.
Were they successful?
No.
No further question, Your Honor. Your witness?
Did you just say that you saw all of this accident while you were at your grandma's house?
As I said before, I was on my way to Grandma's house with her refrigerator when I saw this man harassing Mr. Brown.
Tell us, Mr. Dean, why did you wait to come forward to tell your story?
Because I need to have a way to sum up all of my concrete evidence and show it to the judge and the juries in the correct way. I think it's time people found out the truth.
Mr. Dean, did you see Mr. Smith attack Mr. Dean?
not physically, but verbally. He called him a fatso.
But words can't hurt, isn't it?
Look, we all have feelings. Words can hurt a lot more than sticks and stones.
But Mr. Dean, do you see Mrs. Smith physically cause Mr. Brown to fall from the wall?
No,
No further questions, Your Honor.
Does the prosecution have any other witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Mr. Jarvis.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
What exactly is your job?
I'm currently in cardiologist at UC Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. I graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School and I have specialized at this field for over 10 years.
What did you learn from the investigation of Mr. Brown test?
During the autopsy process, I have done imaging tests, including an electrical diagram, which is a special ultrasound or a CT scan or MRI of Mr. Brown's heart. And eventually, I saw some noticeable heart muscle have been damaged.
What does that mean?
The damages to his heart suggested that Mr. Brown has experienced a heart attack before. In addition to that, there's blockage in the left artery leading to his heart. This reduces the blood flow to his heart muscle. And obviously, without emergent treatment, his heart muscle begins to die and cause permanent damage to his heart and kill him.
Do you have any evidence to show the judge and the jury?
I certainly do have. The CT scan of Mr. Brown's heart. Em mày được. The CT scan of Mr. Brown's heart. The CT scan of Mr. Brown's heart. Electrocardiogram of heart attack before. This evidence suggested that Mr. Brown had experienced very emotional events that caused his own desire to come back and give final trick, leading to his death.
You may step down, Mr. Jarvis. The prosecution may call its next witness. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
The defense may call it the first witness.
The defense calls Mrs. Smith.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Mrs. Smith, where were you on the morning of March 20, 2021?
I was making my rounds through Yellowtown.
Did anything unusual happen that morning?
Well, as my partner and I approached the wall between Yellowtown and Greentown, Mr. Brown started making some snide remarks about the police department car.
Then what happened?
I told him he should have more respect for the police car and the police department in general.
And what was his response?
He started saying like how he wishes to be was in the Greentown instead of the Yellowtown, because he never really fit into the Yellowtown.
Then what happened?
I decided that he was having a bad day and it's just best to leave him alone.
Did you start an argument with him about his size?
I did not start the agreement.
But did you argue?
Well, he did say that no one ever liked him because of his shape.
And what was your reply?
I asked him if he ever considered doing something about his weight. Maybe he could feel better than himself if he wasn't so chubby.
What was his condition when you left him?
Well, I guess you could say that he was in a foul mood. Like, hey, everyone have those kind of days when nothing seems to go right. Well, I guess it was his day.
So when you left Mr. Brown, was he still sitting on the wall?
Yes, he was.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Does the prosecution wish to cross-examine the witness? The prosecution?
Does the prosecution, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Smith, do you have testified that Mr. Brown was still sitting on the wall when you left him? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But you also said that he was in a full mood. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was he in a full mood?
Hey, you should, like, how should I know? Chubby people aren't always happy.
No, man. Mr. Smith, did you at once have a weight problem?
I have had before, but I learned how to control myself. That's all that takes a little self-control.
So you feel that Mr. Brown did not have any self-control?
No, I didn't say that.
But would you say that you feel like that?
Well, he could take better care of himself, right?
Thank you. No further question.
Thank you. You may step down, Mr. Smith. The prosecution may call our next witness.
The defense calls Mr. Jordan.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Jordan, where were you on the morning of March 20, 2021?
Well, I was on routine patrol through Yellowtown.
Did anything unusual happen while you were on patrol?
What do you mean unusual?
I mean, did you have any encounters during the patrol?
Well, I did have a conversation with Mr. Brown.
What was the nature of the conversation?
Well, I asked him how things were going, just a simple chit chat.
Was anyone with you at this time?
My partner, Mr. Smith, was with me.
So did he also have a conversation with Mr. Dumpty?
Yes, he did talk to him.
What was the nature of his conversation?
Phần này là tiếc của.
Objection calls for speculation.
Mr. Kingsman was present at the time. He is aware of the kind of conversation it was.
Overruled.
Mr. Jordan, what was the nature of the conversation?
Mr. Smith was joking with Mr. Brown about his body.
Would you say Mr. Brown took this conversation as joking?
Mr. Brown did get a little bit upset, but it was all in fun.
What did you do?
I went back to the car and continued on my rounds.
Do you see Mr. Smith again?
Yes, he later caught up me to patrol.
What was his attitude when he caught up to you?
He seemed a little annoyed. I asked him if everything was okay. Then he snapped at me, to leave it alone.
Why did you do that?
I left it alone.
Then what happened?
We continued on our rounds.
Did you come back to the wall where Mr. Brown was sitting?
Yes.
What did you see when you returned?
Well, when I returned, Mr. Brown had fallen off the wall and was lying there, motionless.
What did you do next?
I and Mr. Smith got down and tried to pick him up, but we could not see the breath.
No further questions, Your Honor. Your witness.
Does the prosecution wish to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Jordan, you said that you drove away when Mr. Smith was still talking to Mr. Brown.
Yes, that's true.
So you didn't actually hear the conversation between Mr. Kingsman and Mr. Jordan, didn't you?
Well, I didn't hear all of it, but I heard enough to know what is it about.
But you didn't hear all of it, did you?
No,
When you came back to the wall and saw Mr. Brown, what was your reaction?
I was shocked.
Now you indicate that Mr. Smith joked about Mr. Brown.
Yes, he did.
As you look at Mr. Brown, did you think there was any hope to help him now?
It looked hopeless. I did not see him breathing anymore.
So Mr. Smith did not try to help, right?
No, he did fall into the same situation as me. Both of us were hopeless and shocked.
No further questions?
You may step down, Mr. Jordan. The defense may call its next witness.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
We will now hear the closing arguments from the both sides. Are the attorneys ready to close?
Yes,
Yes,
Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please start with the prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Bình tĩnh anh Vinh ơi.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear this case. As you can see, it is a very simple case of jealousy and power. Mr. Smith knows that he has more self-control than Mr. Brown, and he used that self-control to agitate Mr. Brown to the point that he fell off the wall. You heard the testimony from Dr. Jarvis that he identified the notorious disease and suggestion of emotional events directly caused Mr. Brown's death. In addition to that, Mr. Dean testified that he watched from his car and Mr. Smith taunted and teased Mr. Brown's body. Do you think that this is an action that a police official should do? I certainly do not. Ladies and gentlemen, you have no choice but to return the verdict of the guilty against Mr. Smith. He is guilty of the death of Mr. Brown and has shown no remorse for this crime. Thank you.
The defense, you may make your closing statements.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the attorney from the prosecution would have you believe that this is a simple open and shut case, but I submit that this is simply not the case. Mr. Smith has testified that Mr. Brown was still on the wall when he left him. Even Mr. Dean, the prosecution's own witness, testified that Mr. Brown was still on the wall when Mr. Jordan left the scene. If Mr. Brown fell off the wall, it is because of his agitation and not from the actions of my client. Mr. Smith has been a member of the Jalo County Police Department for a number of years and has not had any problems. He may not have used good judgment in his comments to Mr. Brown, but that doesn't make him a murderer. Ladies and gentlemen, for you to return a verdict of guilty, and you must believe that the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that my client, Mr. Smith, is guilty of murder. If you still have some doubts over this, then this verdict is simple, not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now your responsibility to deliberate and decide if indeed you believe Mr. Smith is guilty or not the crime for which he is accused. The decision must be unanimous. The bailiff will now dismiss the juries into the juror room for the discussion. Welcome back, the court. After the juries have deliberated and come up with the final decisions, the Mr. Smith was not guilty.